So thank you very much, and thank you for coming out to talk about one of the most depressing, but I think most important issues confronting this democracy today. So the wrap on this institution is that it is fundamentally corrupt. Filled with the likes of Rod Blagojevich, or he actually didn't succeed in buying his Senate seat, so not Blagojevich, but Randy Duke Cunningham or William Jefferson, filled with criminals. People trafficking in the brown paper bags, engaging in quid-pro-quo bribery. And that rap leads an extraordinary number of Americans to expressly say most in Congress are corrupt. But it's my view that that judgment, that understanding of the institution of Congress is wrong. And the idea that it's filled with the likes of Rod Blagojevich is completely wrong. This institution of Congress is, as my colleague Dennis Thompson puts it, the cleanest institution of Congress in the history of that institution. The integrity and competence is as high as it has ever been. So if...
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
I want to say neither is Congress a crook. But there is an important sense of this term corruption that does predicate properly of this institution. That's true. Not corruption of the people inside that institution, but a corruption of the institution itself, what we could call institutional corruption, or as I'll say, a kind of dependence corruption. And we get this sense of the term corruption by going back to the sense our framers had about the institution they were building. They gave us what they called a republic, by which they meant a representative democracy, by which, as Federalist 52 describes, they meant a government with a House dependent upon the people alone. So here's their model of government. We have the people, and we have the government. I do my own slides. It's really cool the way that bounces like that. I know this is Hollywood. It's not so cool. But okay, for me, Cambridge is pretty cool. The problem with this model of government is that our Congress has evolved a different dependence. Not just a dependence upon the people, but increasingly a dependence upon the funders. As members spend between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress, they, like any of us, develop a sixth sense, a constant awareness about how what they do might affect their ability to raise money. They become, in the words of the X-Files, shape-shifters, as they constantly adjust their views on issues 10 through 2000 in light of what they know will raise money. Leslie Byrne, a Democrat from Virginia, describes that when she went to Congress, she was told by a colleague, quote, always lean to the green. And then she went on to clarify, he was not an environmentalist. Now the point is, this is a dependence too. But it's a different and conflicting dependence from a dependence upon the people alone because, surprise, surprise, the funders are not the people. 0.26% of Americans. I know you're thinking, I'm a lawyer, I don't know percentages, but it's really 0.26% of Americans give more than $200 in a congressional election. 0.05% of Americans max out to any congressional candidate. 0.01%, the 1% of the 1%, give more than $10,000 in an election cycle. And as you heard in the introduction from Ian, 0.000063% have given more than 80% of the money given to super PACs in this election cycle so far. So the Occupy Wall Street people are proud of their slogan, we are the 99%, bad marketing, right? They are the 99.74%, or the 99.95%, or the 99.99%, or the 99.9999937% who don't have the access that the 0.26, 0.05, 0.01, 0.000063 do because they don't give the money that drives these elections. The tiniest slice of the people fund the vast majority of campaign costs. Now, the Supreme Court doesn't get this yet, but it will. This is corruption. It's not brown paper bag corruption. It's not Rob Blagojevich corruption. It is instead a corruption relative to the framers' baseline of what our government would be. It's a corruption relative to the idea of a government dependent upon the people alone. It is, in this sense, a dependence corruption. Now, this corruption has an effect. Number one, Americans believe, and I think they are right to believe, Americans believe money buys results in Congress. In a poll that I conducted for the book that I published last fall, 75% of Americans believe money buys results in Congress. A little bit more Democrats than Republicans, but I guarantee you before the Republicans took control of the House, it was just as many Republicans as Democrats. So whether it's 2/3 or 3/4, here's the one thing we as Americans all believe. Money buys results in Congress. And that leads to number two. That belief erodes the trust that we have in this institution of Congress. Gallup found last year 11% of Americans have confidence in Congress. They then revised that. They said it was 12%. The New York Times said it's actually 9% who have confidence in Congress. 9%. You should keep that in context. There was certainly a higher percentage of Americans who believed in the British Crown at the time of the Revolution than who believe in this Congress today. And that leads to number three. Low trust erodes participation in the institutions of government. So Rock the Vote, which registers and turns out young people in elections, and registered and turned out the largest number of young people in the election that brought us Barack Obama to the presidency, found in 2010 a significant number of their members were not going to turn out to vote. So they polled them. And the number one reason by far, 2-to-1 over the second highest reason, was no matter who wins, corporate interest will still have too much power and prevent real change. And it's not just kids. The vast majority of Americans who could have voted did not vote, in part at least because of this belief. Okay, so what should we do about this problem? If the problem here is systemic, that the funders are not the people, in my view, the solution is a systemic solution. The solution is to make it so the funders are the people. To give them away, I know that sounds like I'm saying give Congress away, and many would like to do that, but that's not what I'm saying. Give Congress a way to fund without Faust, without selling their souls and thereby alienating most in America. And the one way, and increasingly I think the only way to do this, is to embrace what I want to call citizen-funded campaigns. Now you say, what would citizen-funded campaigns be? Okay, well, the first thing we have to accept is that you need to fund campaigns. Up north in Silicon Valley, they think we could just use the internet. We wouldn't have to fund anything. But let's get over that naivete for a minute and recognize we have to fund campaigns. But the question is by whom? So we could say between citizens and non-citizens, who should fund campaigns? So non-citizens like the Chinese or the French. Or here's the critical fact, whether or not a corporation is a person, no one has ever said a corporation is a citizen. Okay, so between non-citizens and citizens, it's a non-starter to suggest anybody other than citizens should be in the business of funding the elections that will select our government. So that's one sense of citizen-funded campaigns. But how do we fund campaigns by citizens? Because you could look at the current system and you could say, well, the current system is a kind of citizen-funded campaign through private money, right? So large dollar-funded campaigns funded by a small percentage of Americans, the 2/6, 0.5, or 0.1. But that system produces a radically unequal set of influence inside of our political system. Indeed, if you think about the difference between the two elections that we go through every single election cycle, one, the voter election, the election that happens on election day when voters actually vote, and two, the money election, The election that happens every single day before Election Day, when candidates are in the business of trying to raise money to fund their campaigns so that they will prevail on Election Day, our Constitution has been interpreted to say, in the voting election, we all have to be almost exactly equal. So this is a graph thinking about the bottom 20%, the 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, 80 to 95, 95 to 100, 99, and then the 1%. All of us are supposed to have the same power. And if one district turns out to have a little bit more power than another, then we have to redraw the boundaries to make sure that we're all basically the same, down to like 0.1% of power. But when we shift to the money election, there's a radically different amount of power as a function of which income group you come to. And I know you're wondering what happened to these people. They're actually there. You just can't see them because they're so small. In this election, in 2008, the 1% gave more than 11 times per capita than the 99%. And that's inflated by the 95 to 99% in the bottom 99%. If you break it out even further, you see the radical difference in influence per capita because of the way we fund these elections. So the system we have right now funds with the tiniest slice of the 1%. This is the image of the current system. And in that sense, I don't think we should understand citizen-funded elections to be the kind of elections funded by these private sources. Well, that leads some people to say we should think about citizen-funded elections as an election funded by the government. So that's what the FEC does when the FEC used to fund presidential elections. There's only one candidate who has taken presidential funding this time, and you will hear him next time you come, Buddy Roemer, who is a third-party candidate who is qualified in getting presidential election funding. He is the only one who is getting it. And that in part reflects the fact that for whatever reason, this system has become hated inside of our political culture. It's viewed as arbitrary. How much you get is determined by bureaucrats weighing costs that nobody knows how it is done. And some believe, this is not my view, but some believe there's something fundamentally wrong with my money subsidizing your speech. And it is, as many bureaucracies in Washington, increasingly bloated and bureaucratic, leading many people to reject the idea that this could be a picture of citizen-funded elections. But as you might suspect, by the way I've laid out this really cute graphic here, there is something between these two, a representative way of funding elections. Through what we can think of as voluntary small dollar funded campaigns. Campaigns where candidates opt into accepting small dollar contributions only, which then the system amplifies to assure the possibility that they can win their elections without ever taking large contributions from anyone. Now, there are many versions of this system. 3 states now have this system for their state legislatures. Connecticut was the most recent to adopt it. When Connecticut adopted it, 78% of elected representatives, Republicans and Democrats alike, used this small dollar funding system to fund their campaigns, never requiring them to raise any large contribution at all. And in 2010, in the fall, the House came very close to passing this bill, the Fair Elections Now Act, which would create a similar version at the federal level. But really, the very best version is the one I've come up with. That's in my book. So here's a little bit different version. It's basically the same idea. Let's call it the Grant and Franklin Project. So here's the way the Grant and Franklin Project works. We have to first stipulate with me, every single American gives at least $50, gives in quotes, to the federal treasury, whether through income tax or payroll tax or Social Security tax or cigarette tax or gas tax, whatever. Money goes to the federal treasury, at least $50 from all of us. So that means we can rebate the first $50 that all of us give to the treasury in the form of a democracy voucher and believe all of us have, in that sense, contributed the money we're getting back. So we rebate back to everybody a democracy voucher worth $50 that they can give to candidates running for Congress, and candidates can take it if they agree to fund their campaigns with democracy vouchers and with contributions limited to $100 from any citizen. So just like Roemer takes $100, this is $100, but in addition to $100, you get money from these vouchers. Okay, so That's the Grant and Franklin project. Here's what it would mean. $50 per voter is $7 billion. The total amount raised and spent in the congressional elections in 2010 was $1.8 billion. So $50 a voter is about 3 times the total amount raised in 2010, and that's not counting any contributions of up to $100 per citizen. So that's real money. But the way that money gets given, it's representative, because everybody in the system is participating in funding these elections. And so it's small dollar funding that is driving the candidates to focus not on the tiniest slice of the 1%, but on a broad range of Americans who would be funding elections under this system. That's what I mean by representative. That's what I mean by citizen-funded elections or citizen-funded campaigns. These are campaigns where small dollars fund the campaigns with a representative distribution because of the way we secure the resources that everybody has to give to the campaigns. Now, if we had a system like this, a system like the Grant and Franklin project, or a system where small dollar contributions were the only way candidates funded their campaigns, what would it buy? What would we get from it? And my view is the first and most important thing we would get is an opportunity to restore trust back into the system. Because when Congress does something stupid in a world where small dollars have elected representatives, then we can believe that maybe it's because there are too many Republicans rather than Democrats, or too many Democrats rather than the Republicans. But we all can believe because we want to believe it's not because of the money that they made that mistake, because we had removed that essential corrupting influence from the system. So that's one thing it would buy, the opportunity to restore trust. And the second thing it would buy is perhaps more participating in the system. Because as we would move this to be the picture of our campaigns, to this being the picture of the way people participate, both in voting and in contributing, then fewer people would have the excuse that these tiny slice of the 1% are driving results in a way that makes it so there's no reason for them to participate. And more people would have a reason then to participate in the system. So in this sense, this system would be buying votes, as in buying more votes in the system from Americans who are re-engaged because they believe there's a reason to be engaged. Okay, so how exactly could we bring such a system about? And here's where it gets depressing. Indeed, I think it's possibly difficult to think about how we bring such a system about. This man, Jim Cooper, a Democrat from Tennessee, who's been in Congress for as long as all but about 20 other members of Congress, in a very depressing conversation one day, said to me, the real problem with Capitol Hill is that Capitol Hill has become a kind of farm league for K Street. Members and staffers and bureaucrats have an increasingly common business model, a business model focused on their life after government, their life as lobbyists. So Public Citizen calculated between 1998 and 2004, 50% of senators left the Senate to become lobbyists, 42% of members of the House. This is a world where everyone depends upon this existing system surviving. It is their retirement. It is the way they're going to pay for their kids' school, because they'll retire and increase their salary on average 1,482% as they move into this alternative system of influence. And in that world, how would we ever imagine them changing this system? If they depend on it, how could they change it? And the one hope here, maybe the only hope here, is that we begin to recognize the place of outsiders in our political game. Right? So the Chatterati are obsessed with the difference between the left side and the right side in American politics. But I think the only interesting difference in American politics is between the inside and the outside. The inside, the world inside that beltway, that world of Washington, D.C., versus the rest of the country. And when you listen to what people inside talk about, the issues that they talk about, they are radically different from the issues that people like you care about or would talk about. The issue of money in politics will not be in this campaign for president because neither side has the hypocrisy enough to raise it as an issue, recognizing how they're funding their campaign. So when you listen to what they talk about versus what Americans talk about, increasingly recognize that they are from Mars and we are from Earth, right? So the inside here has its own politics. And if we think about it, we can see these waves of open source energy that have exploded using the infrastructure of the internet. I think 1998 and Move On was the first example of this. Millions coming together in outrage and disgust at a Congress focusing on the indiscretion of a president at a time when there were a million other issues they needed to be paying attention to. I think the Tea Party in 2009 is a similar movement, inspired from an outside. I think Occupy in 2011 was a similar movement. I think the anti-SOPA PIPA movement was a similar outside the Beltway wave of energy that just sparked up and nobody predicted or controlled it. These outsiders are passionate and they come from both sides of the political spectrum. And that passion is good. But they are also polarized. And that polarization is dangerous. Indeed, like everyone in our political system, politicians, political parties, the media, even the organizations, the .orgs that try to rally people to their cause, like all of these organizations, these outsiders practice this kind of business model of polarization, a business model recognizing that everyone profits in this system the more we learn to hate the other side. We've built a kind of Ray-Ban culture, polarized but very cool. That's our vision of how we should engage. So we have these outsiders who are impossibly polarized, or at least the institutions of these outsiders, impossibly polarized. What could we possibly do in response to that to bring about the change that these outsiders need to effect? Well, I have the answer in this little book. It's a 50-page ebook, but I don't actually have time right now to describe it, so I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to instead leave you with the answer this man told us 4 years ago. 4 years ago, this man told us again and again, what we need to do is to take up that fight to change the way Washington works. Because what he recognized, we need to recognize. What he recognized was that we were going to see no change until we changed this. Just step back from any issue you care about and connect the dots to every issue you care about. Whether it's healthcare reform for people on the left or government bailouts for people on the right. Whether it's global warming for people on the left or complex tax systems for people on the right. Whether it's financial reform for people on the left or financial reform for people on the right. The point is, regardless of the issue, we will get no change until we change this system. As Obama said, if we're not willing to take up that fight, then real change, change that will make a lasting difference in the lives of ordinary Americans, will keep getting blocked by the defenders of the status quo. He said that, and now he has seen it. So can we actually inspire these outsiders to bring about this change? I confess I have no idea. But we have no choice but to try. Thank you very much.